Good evening. Okay, I'd like to start by providing a few Zoom housekeeping techniques. All attendees are currently muted and will remain muted throughout the presentation. If you'd like to ask any clarifying questions or provide a comment, there will be an opportunity for public testimony after the presentation. At that time, we'll call on you by name, unmute you, and ask that you unmute yourself. You can turn on your video by clicking Start Video button, and which is located in the lower left-hand corner of the screen, or turn it off by clicking the Stop Video. We'd ask that everyone maintain good Zoom etiquette tonight, and we'll have a productive meeting. So thank you all for your help in this. Next slide, please, Tyler. Tonight, we will be primarily using the Zoom chat function as a virtual sign-in sheet. To access the chat box, you can click on the chat icon, which is located at the bottom of your screen, and then the chat box should appear on the lower right-hand corner of your screen. At this point in the meeting, please do use the chat box to sign into the meeting by typing your name, your affiliation, and both with any organization and the community in which you are either a resident or working, we're representing tonight. This is to ensure that we have an accurate count of who is attending the meeting tonight. We'll also be using the raise hand function for the public comment portion of tonight's meeting. During the public comment portion, if you'd like to provide a comment, you can click the reactions icon at the bottom of your screen and then click raise hand. Once your name is called, you can unmute yourself and provide public comment. Please state your name and affiliation before providing your comment. And again, if we encounter technical issues, we will work through them. So everyone has an opportunity to listen and participate and ask clarifying questions. Next slide, please, Tyler. Before the city begins their presentation on Municipal Harbor Plan and Designated Port Area Master Plan, I'd like to share a brief introduction about municipal harbor plans and the associated timeline for the review of this plan. The Commonwealth's Municipal Harbor Planning Program, administered by Coastal Zone Management on behalf of the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, provides cities and towns with the opportunity to propose certain modifications to standards contained in the state's Chapter 91 Waterways regulations in order to implement local waterfront planning and management goals. The Commonwealth is beginning the process of reviewing the Gloucester Municipal Harbor Plan and the Designated Port Area Master Plan. In accordance with the appropriate regulations at 301 CMR 23, the Office of Coastal Zone Management is conducting this hearing tonight on April 25th, 2025, to receive public comment on the Municipal Harbor Plan and the Designated Port Area Master Plan. The plan was submitted by the city on March 6th, 2025, and noticed in the March 26, 2025 edition of the Environmental Monitor, which began the public comment period. Comments must be received by 5 p.m. on April 25th, 2025. Emailed comments are preferred and can be sent to catherine.glenn@mes.gov, but physically mailed comments can also be sent to the Office of Coastal Zone Management at 100 Cambridge Street, Suite 900, Boston, Massachusetts, 02114, to the attention of Catherine Glenn. That was a lot. The information is on the screen. We'll also be pasting it in the chat so that you'll have it, and it will be available after the hearing. Copies of the City of Gloucester's proposed plan are available on the City of Gloucester's website, and individuals may obtain copies of the plan upon request by reaching out to Greg Catamatori at 978-325-5242 or at gcatamatori@gloucester-ma.gov. Copies of the state regulations under which the proposed planning program will be evaluated can be obtained from the state bookstore via the bookstore website or CZM's website. After the introduction, the city is going to provide an overview of the plan, and then the floor will be open for the public comment period. But to step back a little bit, this public process began in 2021. And as noted, we are currently where the yellow arrow is, nearing the end of the process, as the City of Gloucester has submitted the MHP. The purpose of this hearing is to provide, as I've said, an opportunity for formal public comment on the proposed plan, to listen to your comments, input, and feedback. Other than clarifying questions, we'll not be responding to substantive comments this evening. After the public comment period, the next phase of review is the consultation period, starting on April 26, 2025. This is where the state and the city meet to review input received during the public comment period and clarify and discuss specific portions of the municipal harbor plan. After the consultation phase of the MHP process, the next step would be issuance of a decision by the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs. Once the Secretary issues a decision on the municipal harbor plan, the next step would be for the Department of Environmental Protection, DEP, to commence a process for amending the Chapter 91 regulations to include the relevant provisions of the municipal harbor plan. Okay, with that regulatory background out of the way, I'm going to turn the floor over to Planning Director Greg Catamatori and the city's consultants for an overview of the plan. Over to you, Greg.
Thank you, Allison. And the mayor sends his regrets. He would have been here this evening. There was a community forum that was planned for this evening that certainly wasn't contemplated when this was first noticed in the environmental monitor, as well as noticing it locally. But I really appreciate, I certainly can share his appreciation for DEP and CZM support of the Harbor Plan Committee and the development of the plan. I think over the course of maybe a longer plan development period than typical, we certainly received a lot of very good feedback from a very diverse stakeholder group, as well as the committee being composed of diverse interests on the harbor. And we believe, with the support of our consultant team this evening, Matt Littell is here, as well as Jamie Fay, that we've really developed something that, provides for true support for traditional industries, primarily commercial fishing, as well as creating some opportunity for emerging markets. And I think this plan might be a little bit unique in also providing a lot of initiative that the city can take, actions that we can take to help support and nurture the harbor through the planning period. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt, and he can run through the highlights of the plan, and we'll try to keep our presentation brief because, again, as you've noted, this is really about hearing from the public. I see the listing of the participants, and I also appreciate folks that have really followed this process from the very beginning, and I'm interested to hear their comments as well as we come to a close on the development of the plan.
Thank you, Greg. As you mentioned, I'm joined by Jamie Fay, who will discuss some of the technical aspects of the plan, the regulatory approach. I will kick off a little bit by just talking more generally about the framework and some of the economic development issues that we explored with the Harbor Planning Committee. I'll frame the overall goals, just review very quickly some of the timeline and adoption processes that are underway, as well as a brief summary of our engagement. I will summarize the economic development framework, which was a really important part of this plan. And then Jamie will address the regulatory approaches that we proposed in the plan. The plan stayed fairly true to the renewal and amendment goals that we set out in our notice to proceed. One was aligning the municipal harbor plan and the designated port area plan with the city's goals of diversifying and modernizing its maritime economy. So shoring up not just the traditional fishing industries, but other uses as well. Incorporating long-term planning measures to adapt to risks associated with rising sea levels. And finally, the real goal is renewing the 2014 Gloucester Municipal Harbor Plans and the provisions of the DPA plan for an additional 10 years. So I think we're on time. Very brief summary. We conducted outreach in a number of formats that included stakeholder interviews with a series of affected property owners and people involved in the maritime industries. We had 18 very involved and lively Harbor Planning Committee meetings that spanned over the course of several years. We also had three large public meetings, which included breakout rooms, discussions, and some polling about preference. And I think that this has been mentioned, but we are sort of currently in the public comment period for this final plan. That's followed by generally 60-day consultation period and then a secretary's decision 21 days after that. The economic development framework was really where we spent a lot of our effort. This is a very complex and large sort of framework diagram, but I think it's the one that tells the whole story. We were looking, if you start from sort of the bottom up, we were looking at sector-specific economic trends. So living resources, that really is fishing, offshore minerals, marine construction, transportation, tourism, recreation. We were also took a very careful look at the infrastructure that's used to support these sorts of industries, including on and offshore utilities, roadways, channels, bulkheads, things like that. And then the sort of impact and the emerging understanding of the flood risk. These sort of observations and inputs were fed through a series of sort of different lenses in different areas. And what the plan reflects is sort of two avenues to support some of these objectives. The one is the regulatory plan itself that Jamie will discuss, and that includes not only the municipal harbor plan, the DPA plan that is within it, but also the local zoning codes that are sort of aligned with that. And then on the economic development side, the focus was really on fundraising, financing, and grant making, marketing, recruiting, network, and capacity building. So there's a step really in terms of promotion and a different kind of institutional and governmental support that is required to sort of take the next step. The Seaport Advisory Council in 2017 did a sort of statewide assessment of the various what we call blue sector economies. These are various aspects of the blue economy, if you will. It includes living resources, as I mentioned, offshore minerals, marine construction, transportation, ship and boat building, and coastal tourism and recreation. What was really most applicable to the Gloucester context in terms of what is going on now and where things might be going is obviously the focus area on seafood markets, but also the important role of coastal tourism and recreation, which is also a sort of equally significant part of the activity in the harbor and the economy of the city. We also, as part of our investigations, tried to better understand where key assets in the harbor, particularly marine industrial or water-dependent types of facilities, were vulnerable to, in terms of their infrastructure, aging infrastructure, in terms of potential current and future water depth. And we sort of have looked at this through a much longer term lens, which is to look at the flood risk now, based on floods that have been experienced as recently as 2018, but also the sort of upside of what FEMA is telling us may happen eventually. And the long and the short of it is that a lot of the significant building infrastructure, if you will, that supports the economic activity in the harbor is at a juncture where flooding will have to be addressed and infrastructure will have to be sort of improved to address these long-term changes. The economic development objectives really summarize quite a bit of finer points. I encourage you all to look in more detail at what's under these objectives. But the first one was to As I mentioned, strengthen the organizational capacity and the regulatory foundation to support harbor economic development. This is about looking for new uses, as well as supporting what's there now. The second was to diversify and invest in the harbor holistically. And that means creating a more resilient harbor, both economically and environmentally. Um, Objective three was cultivating a high-profile, unified, supported, and well-resourced fishing and shellfishing network in Gloucester. Obviously, it's been in place for a while, but it requires continued and ongoing adaptation and support. And then advancing relevant innovation in blue tech, marine life sciences, offshore wind industries within and beyond Gloucester's working harbor, which is seen as an area that's gotten some traction. You may be familiar with the GMGI building, but an area where the harbor can grow in a way that's compatible with the current traditional uses. Addressing climate change, the threat of rising sea levels, potential storm damages, those elements are addressed in the plan sort of universally. There isn't sort of one specific place, but uh, finding the resources to repair infrastructure and to adapt to sea level rise is permeated throughout both the economic development aspect of the plan, but also the regulatory pieces. I will hand it off to Jamie to discuss the regulatory approaches, and I'm happy to advance the slides, Jamie, whenever you're ready.
Probably better if I unmute myself, huh? Yeah, thanks, Matt. I appreciate the opportunity to share where we are on this aspect of the harbor plan. Again, I would say the principal goal here is to create, on the one hand, a little bit more flexibility in some of the areas under Chapter 91 to advance the city's objectives, but also to provide some really specific guidance to the DEP Waterways program and when they're contemplating licenses in Gloucester Harbor and making sure that they're tailored really to the priorities that the community has set forth in this plan. So in general, there are four elements that we've addressed in this plan: flexibility in the water dependent use zone, prevention of displacement of commercial fishing vessels, promoting access to the waterfront, public access to the waterfront without impacting maritime activities, and flexibility to use off-site mitigation in some circumstances. And I'll go into each of these, but I do just want to note that there was one provision in the 2014 Harbor Plan that is not found in this. And that actually it's a great story. So in 2014, the plan expanded the range of uses that could be considered water dependent industrial. And Matt mentioned the GMGI activity. And that was sort of a provision that came out of the Harbor Plan to allow other supporting uses to be distributed across the harbor. And what's happened in this case is that DEP has, or CCM has, made a determination that that particular approach used in the last plan is actually not totally compliant. And so we had to adapt this plan to reflect that new interpretation. And I'm sorry, the other point not listed in this note, but was also done in 2014, the Harbor Plan defined marine research activities as a new expansion of water-dependent industrial use activities, and that's no longer in this plan either, because in fact that new definition has gotten adopted on a statewide basis, not just in Gloucester. So there's an example where Gloucester came up with something that's actually now applicable statewide. So next, Matt. So this first one is a provision that applies both in the designated port area, but in the rest of the harbor as well. And it's really allows for a reconfiguration of the water dependent use zone. And the water dependent use zone is an area along the water's edge that's reserved primarily for water dependent uses. It's prescriptive in its dimensions under the Chapter 91 regulations, but many of the harbor plans throughout the state have provided some additional flexibility in how that can be calculated. And so this substitution, which is very similar to the substitution that was provided in the 2014 plan, allows just a little bit more flexibility if somebody's coming forward with a project to modify the location of the water dependent use zone. It ensures that there's no reduction in the size of the water dependent use zone. It ensures that it's close to the water and usable. But it's really just something that has proved valuable. And let me show you a couple of examples of this, Matt. The next slide. This first slide is a slide in which a project we did in East Boston on the waterfront. And you can see that yellow area on the plan, that's the defined by regulation, Chapter 91 regulation, water dependent use zone. The small piece of a building encroached into that. There was an offsetting area to the plan north that actually expanded the water dependent use zone in that area, and an area that's actually more effective and usable for access out to that pier that you see along the top of the property. Next slide. And here's another example that Matt and I worked on in Chelsea together, where this is for an industrial waterfront, the DPA waterfront, taking an area which is highlighted in the outline there, and allowing a water dependent use zone in that area, which is actually not very usable because it's adjacent to very shallow water and doesn't have any piers or wharves there, and relocate it closer to the harbor out near the channel where it actually will be far more effective. So this is just two examples of where that flexibility has come into play in a positive way, and I'm sure we'll find similar ones going forward in Gloucester. Next. One common theme we heard loud and clear from Gloucester is concern over displacement of commercial fishing vessels. And this is something that I think we worked really hard on to try to figure out the best way to approach this particular issue. There's certainly a lot in the Chapter 91 regulations that prevents existing water dependent uses from being displaced by new projects. So there's already, a significant amount of protection in the regulations, but they're not so finely tuned as to identify commercial fishing vessels as opposed to a broader range of vessel activity. So this was really an amplification, meaning it's something that DEP needs to consider in issuing licenses in Gloucester Harbor. It kind of provides policy direction to them. And this language is somewhat similar to what was in the 2014 plan, but gives a lot more specifics. And those items 1 through 6 really help DEP ensure that if somebody's coming in and displacing commercial fishing vessels from a particular project, that somehow, somewhere, and appropriately, those vessels are accommodated elsewhere in the harbor. Next. Another theme that was both in the 2014 plan and that we heard in the process is trying to encourage and maximize public access in areas along the waterfront that where it can be accommodated without obviously affecting ongoing commercial vessel activity. So this amplification is very similar to what was included in 2014 and simply suggests and encourages DEP to allow public access where it can be safely accommodated in projects, which allows the public access close to the water where they can view ongoing commercial activities, but without actually getting in the way or affecting ongoing operations. Next. The final amplification is one I referred to earlier, allowing in certain circumstances where kind of a mixed use project is being proposed and there's some requirements to provide economic or operational support to water dependent uses. This is similar to, as I said, similar to what was in 2014, but provides a lot more specific guidance and prioritization about how DEP will evaluate any kind of proposal like that in the licensing process. So this really prioritizes providing economic and operational support on site wherever possible. If that happens to be not possible, then the next best thing is to find something nearby where it can be mitigated. And then if it's not really feasible to do it on site, it does allow offsite as well as payments into a city managed fund where payments could be put into an account and then say reallocated by the city for some other type of activity to encourage water dependent industrial use. For example, the kind of floats and landings that you have at the I4C2 parcel or at St. Peter's Landing. So those are the provisions of the regulatory aspect of this plan. I'll turn it back to Matt.
Okay.
Okay, we'll begin our public comment session now.
Great.
Go
Thank
ahead.
you, Jamie and Greg and Matt for that presentation. We have now reached the public comment portion of the public hearing. I'd like to remind folks to please put your name and affiliation in the chat for us tonight so that we know we have a record of who attended and how many folks we have. But at this point, if you'd like to give oral testimony, please raise your hand. And as a reminder, the raise hand function, the raise hand function at the bottom of the screen, click raise hand. If you've called in and you'd like to give comments, you can press *9 on your phone and we can add you to the public testimony list. When your name is called, you can unmute yourself and provide your comment. Please state your name and affiliation before providing your comment. In the interest of everyone's time here, we ask that you please keep your remarks concise, articulating your key concerns and issues. So with that, do we have any elected officials that would like to kick off? I don't know that we do. So that being the case, let's start with Valerie. Valerie, you want to unmute yourself and go ahead and give your comment, please?
Thank you very much, Catherine, and also Glenn Catamatori. I appreciate this. So, I went to all the public meetings, and I think that the plan fairly incorporates actually what so many people who showed up in earlier meetings suggested and, outline, prioritize what they would like to see in the harbor. And I think the fact that there aren't many of us showing up at this last meeting can be seen as an indication of the plan is actually in many ways following through on what the residents in Gloucester and businesses have wanted to see. So I would like to endorse the plan in that respect and say thank you. And if there aren't many of us here, it's an indication, I hope you look at it that way, as having incorporated the values and priorities that emerged in earlier meetings. So I hope that's understood, and we appreciate that. But my comments for tonight have to do with really this moment in time we are at. And I was very concerned to make sure that the plan itself incorporated recommendations and insights that are important to the city of Gloucester and its community moving forward. And I think that it probably does enough of having at least mention in there so that it's not excluded. So I think that it's important to reflect on the pivotal moment that we're in, which starts with the fact that the federal government is proposing to not fund CZM programs at the state level and to disrupt radically management of fisheries and potentially shut down the NOAA office. I'm speaking from the perspective of Gloucester. And I think that we've just begun within Gloucester, and Greg knows about this. He's certainly be informed about meetings I've held, where all of a sudden the world has likely changed, and where a lot of funding and in federal roles are stripped away, that you can argue about whether that's good or not good. But it does mean that whether it's the state or a community like Gloucester has an opportunity and a necessity of rethinking a whole bunch of strategies about where it puts its money and what its strategies are. So back to the harbor and the DPA area. I've had a few meetings recently around the Gloucester economy, and I would say that we're beginning to recognize that on many fronts, the Gloucester local economy is vulnerable to not only funding issues, but even whether tourists from Canada and Europe will be coming here. And one economic sector after another, whether it's fishing or NOAA or hospitality or supply chains and applied materials or construction trades, we are likely to be a fairly vulnerable to community. And so we need to come together and think about essentially the survival of the Gloucester economy and the tax base and et cetera. And I think one of the things that's importantly surfacing is that from a local economic, so let me just be really clear. From a local economic development perspective, local economies that are stronger and more able to recover from shocks like manufacturing plants lead. One of the key points is that you heavily invest in tradable goods where you're bringing income flows into the community, that as opposed to spending money outside. And what absolutely surfaces is in the central importance of investing in the fishing industry and questions about the several decades now of kind of a state priority and local priority. Maybe, Greg, you might disagree about this, but emphasizing tourism, yacht marinas, recreational, cultural, that in some ways the battle recently has been over, we all are familiar with this, is how can we defend the waterfronts to protect fishing industries from these new industries that have to do with tourism, yacht marinas, property sales, get rid of DPA entirely, and also some sort of sense of a new economy around life sciences and biotech and all of that. What we know right now in front of us is that undermining of the biotech economy, the blue economy, the tourism economy, because Canadians and Europeans, they're not going to come here this year. And what's about our labor force and all that? What jumps right out at you, and this is what's important for this plan, is that if you're going to invest in anything as a community or as a state, Catherine, because you're on the screen, as a state, as an economic development strategy, which is fundamental to survival of Massachusetts as we know it, is the fishing industry is one of our most important sectors for tradable goods, what we develop here, and these are all surfacing. And now I want to take the occasion that I know that UTIL went to the National Working Waterfront Conference when it was held in Boston and heard Alaska, Washington, California, Maine, Rhode Island, North Carolina, all speak about working waterfronts, and they're all largely focused around the fishing industry. They're not focused on, let's give away our waterfronts for tourism and yacht marinas, which has been the sort of struggle in Massachusetts. And they had a recent conference in San Diego, and I'd like to send you all the conference agenda from the National Working Waterfront Network Conference. Maine is stellar for, investing in their fishing industry, investing in the economy of their local ports. And so to wrap this up, my perspective, convening community meetings, which I've been sharing with the city and Greg and all of that, is that we locally are going to be forced into a position of a lot of challenges coming our way, having to do with, for God's sake, CZM might be gutted completely. We know this. And funding sources for the way we've done. But centrally, the idea that economic development in the Massachusetts ports should somehow create all the investments and regulatory flexibility around tourism and high-tech ocean science biotech is now under severe questioning. And when you look at it seriously as a local Gloucester economic development question, what rises to the surface is both the severe underinvestment by the state and the local government in the fishing industry, which has within it, and if you go to the conference sessions about cluster economic development, et cetera, Maine is getting this. Why Massachusetts needs to get this is that one of your major assets in the DPAs is the fishing industry because it sells tradable goods. It creates jobs locally that are solid middle-class jobs. It creates food for the community itself. And it's time to pivot from a negotiation over pushing DPAs to accept, all kinds of tourism, yacht marina, removing DPA boundaries. All of that has been historic. And now, because of the moment we're in, we in Gloucester and the state CZM, I believe, has to recognize that things are drastically changing. Our challenges are changing. Where the state needs to invest and where the Gloucester city needs to invest is changing. And my concern was, does this particular plan that is largely based in the conflicts of the past, the efforts of new uses, whether they're tourism or science, to displace in rigorous sort of ways the fishing industry itself, things have changed enough that my concern was, looking through this plan, are there at least in it the elements by which the state itself and the Gloucester community itself sees in that plan the opportunities that will be for the future? And I think there's enough in there. I hope various provisions get strengthened. I encourage all of you to look at the recent San Diego National Working Waterfront Network Conference to see the dynamism in other states for the economy, renewal of the economy, how to address the challenges. And one thing that's striking is in that conference, and for us now locally and whatever meetings I've held so far, investments in this fishing industry and supporting and strengthening and protecting this DPA for the fishing industry, which is their most important and neglected economic asset from the state, federal government, and local, is now surfacing in all of this ferment of discussion at this moment in time. Our Gloucester fishing industry is the most highest priority to invest in. And I realize that in many ways, this plan didn't surface much by way of regulations. It's essentially an opportunity to really emphasize an economic development strategy. And in that regard, highest priority is to take seriously for all kinds of absolutely credible and surfacing, and other states are doing this, to recognizing the centrality and the strength of this historic cluster of innovation and strength and middle-class jobs, not tourism, seasonal low-income jobs, middle-class jobs, clusters, economy, innovation that we acknowledge in this plan and go forward with a commitment to using whatever tools are in the plan that were developed in an era before what we're dealing with now. And I commend all of you. I think the plan has the tools within it. I might recommend that you look back through it to make sure that the National Working Waterfront Network Conference vitality of what's going on in other states incorporate fully the conditions that would enable the state and Gloucester itself to move forward on sustainable economic development strategies within our really beloved, I think that's what you heard from the community of Gloucester over and over and over about, shows up and tells you in public hearings how much this community values this fishing industry, and that you make sure that the provisions are recommended in the plan, that whether it's the state, as your resources get cut, and you're having to deal with the state priorities, but also locally, that we have in this plan the tools and mechanisms for a really a complete paradigm shift, which will be required in a local economic development strategy that reflects what the community wants. And I think that your plan does that, and I encourage you to look back through it and just make sure that the provisions in there, as we pick up the pieces, are all in there so that both the state and Gloucester itself can respond to the crisis and recognize that we're in a completely different era. All those past battles, they're not relevant now. We need to invest in our core innovative cluster of the fishing industry here and related and purely from an economic development strategy for the state and for our local communities. So thank you. I just wanted to stress how the various elements in the plan that I think are in there can help facilitate what the state and Gloucester itself need to do going forward. So I appreciate it. Thank you for allowing me more than 3 minutes too. So I appreciate that. And thank you.
Thanks, Valerie. Is there anybody else who would like to provide some comment? Just raise your hand. Is that Patty? I can see Mortal Arrow Lobster. I'm going to assume it's Patty.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Catherine. Thank you all for having this wrap-up meeting. 4 years has been the longest I've participated. I must admit, I don't remember the beginning of any of this. But the plan is done, and it looks complete, very comprehensive. The economic viability of the fishing industry is still strong. That was reflected in your economic piece here. I just do want to mention that the fishing industry brings not only economic value, but local food security. That's something that we strongly support here. I don't know if any of you realize the scallop fishery opened and closed very quickly this year due to some unnecessary NOAA juggling, but those scallop boats were receiving $40 a pound boat price for U10s. It's unprecedented prices. It was great fishing. A lot of those boats, those vessels don't come from Gloucester. They travel in. It's a big boost to our economy here, even though it's short. But those are the types of opportunities we should be looking for and capitalizing on here in Gloucester. Dockage is always a problem for those vessels having to go over, through the bridge. And that brings me to the vessel dockage. What did you call it? The displacement. Oh my. Oh my. I know I've been the voice for commercial vessel displacement in the port. I don't like it. I don't like what I see. Our recreational boats now it outnumbers at least 2-to-1 within the DPA. I'm unclear. I'm sorry that I haven't followed this, read this as deeply as I need to, but it 5 years prior, these the the process is they just wait 5 years and then apply to DEP and say nothing's ever existed here but yachts for the last 5 years. These are all loopholed workarounds. I could suggest some language that commercial vessels have receipts, proved landings, and stay in the water 11 months of the year. Recreational boats don't do that. Commercial vessels do, unless they're on hard bottom, dry dock. They stay in the water. That's not reflected here, and maybe that just needs. I'll do a written comment for that. We do have commercial vessels that are still on moorings, that are on wait lists, and that really needs to be corrected. I don't know at the state level or the local level, but we see it all the time, and it just the pressures are too much, and I don't think we're going to. I don't know how that's going to get fixed, but when you've got picnic boats in your Harbor Cove, you have serious problems, real serious problems with recreational boats. And I'm not against them. I'm a recreational boater, but the pressures are just too great, and I don't know how that could be dealt with any better. So investment in the seafood industry and the fishing industry has always been my focus, and again, economically it's a benefit, but the food security is very, very important. That's going to come up more and more now with less fish getting landed and caught and processed here. We need to strengthen that. So I appreciate you taking my complaints, and I am signing out. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Patty. Anybody else have any comments you'd like to share? No, I don't want to rush anybody, but I do want to know if you have something to say, please do. This is your opportunity. You can also, of course, submit in writing before the 25th of April, and maybe we can put that slide back up on the screen, Tyler. So there's the information. So you can email those to me at catherine.glenn@mass.gov. You can also send it physically in the mail. Please send it to the Boston office. It will get acknowledged there, it will get stamped in there, and then it will get distributed to me. So please send it if you're going to send a hard copy to the Boston office. And as it says here, the copies are available on the webpage. You can give Greg a call or drop him an email if you have you want to get a copy of it. And then the state regulation that we are reviewing under is here on the page. Valerie, you have additional, or is that still is your hand just still up? I can't tell.
No, this is something else to add. I appreciate that the opportunities in this harbor plan are for the city of Gloucester to undertake economic development locally. And it's been a question since the earlier plan as to, should the city set up a port authority or have a coordinator in the city. I think you laid out all the options and essentially recommended that be some increase in the capacity within the Gloucester community to, provide some support and capacity enhancement around the economic development within the DPA. That's a local issue in terms of, and I think you've done a good job of laying out the options in this plan. What locally, what businesses and the city itself and the community, banks and all of that want to do it as to where and how to create some sort of coordinating capacity around economic development with the harbor. That's not the responsibility of the state, but I think it's very useful that you've laid out the options here, and ultimately the city itself will have to contend with that. When I would just say in passing that, it's helpful to have this report coming out because we're in increasingly severe budget constraints in Gloucester, and whether there's money available to fund a city staff person on economic development, never mind economic development in the harbor, is open to some question. And it's notion of what are the priorities within Gloucester itself is how much does the city and the community want to invest in what your recommendations suggest, amongst the options of somehow to increase the staffing capacity of coordinating a variety of different alternatives and economic development project for the DPA, which was called for in the earlier plan and never actually implemented. So that's something that's the responsibility of Gloucester, and I think the plan has usefully laid out the options. I would say that there is one aspect where the state does have a role in all of this, and I know in the DPA meetings that the state has had, the urgency of the state investing more in the DPAs and the traditional industries has come up. And one of the barriers that Gloucester faces is that, unlike New Bedford, which has huge amounts of property under a Port Authority control, Gloucester has this unique circumstance of so much of the really vibrant and amazingly still kicking and surviving fishing industry here is in private property ownership. And the state has a history of saying that, oh, actually, it can't lend state support to investments in private properties along the waterfront. That is a question that can easily be resolved by the state. There are mechanisms, whether it's easements or ramping up programs at the state level that, as in many other places around the country, many other sectors where, the states are able to provide investment funding in private property ownership that has a public purpose around the local economy. And in this regard, I would urge the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to take seriously the need to make sure that any funding streams that are created at the state level are determined enough, and it's not a big hurdle to do, that those funding streams are accessible by private property owners in the Gloucester waterfront, recognizing that we are kind of unique as a DPA in the extent to which it's private property owners that own so many of the properties other than the state fish pier. And the state so far historically has said, oh, no, you can't get our financial support. So that impediment is something that the state itself is responsible for fixing through whatever mechanisms it can do, so that the really tremendously innovative seafood, landings and processing owners around our Gloucester waterfront are given the appropriate amount of economic development staff support, funding support from the state, and not see the question of whether it's the New Bedford Port Authority that owns the land or private properties in Gloucester stands as a continuing impediment to state investments in our working waterfront. So that is something that I urge the state to consider. I don't know if that issue is even mentioned in this harbor plan, but it needs to be fixed. And otherwise, a lot of the responsibility, as long as this plan endorses and recommends and provides recommendations consistent with the community of Gloucester itself, the industries and the city government, to provide staffing, recognize the centrality of our industries like fishing, and commit to making the necessary investments in this that I think the community calls for. A lot of the responsibility falls on Gloucester itself, but the state has direct responsibility for making sure that it doesn't continue with arbitrary distinctions that are really unusual and are not necessary at all, that somehow New Bedford gets a lot of money for its fishing industry, but we don't, because we have private property ownership. So I would say that you've given in the plan a lot of tools for the city of Gloucester to hire an economic development or harbor development staff person, and I appreciate that. And that's our job here locally, but there are certain things that the state can do, hold the line on the DPA, provide the tools and endorsement of local economic development, and make sure that whatever state investment pools emerge, allow Gloucester with its private property ownership issue that so far the state has said is an unresolvable impediment, that you have fixed it, so that, and I know this issue has come up in your DPA statewide meeting, so please make sure that going forward, the state provides for the unique characteristics of the different DPAs. And in the case of Gloucester, we need to make sure that the state is prepared to invest in the companies, the infrastructure, and the economy of Gloucester in ways that are not path-breaking, they're standard everywhere, so that the state can invest in the incredible assets of our working waterfront going forward. So, and a lot of the work of making sure that we work on economic development in Gloucester is going to fall on us locally, but anything you can do to make sure that the state plays an active role going forward and does not hold up arbitrary impediments under some old-fashioned idea that our future is tourism and blue economy. I mean, I think we're back to fundamentals here, and I hope the state will remove any artificial impediments to and encourage investment by the state government and legislature in investment in our DPA here in Gloucester. So thank you for a second chance to both endorse your plan, but as a state government, make sure that anything that is in here acknowledges the important role of the state in helping us locally to really advance economic development in our local DPA.
Great. Thanks, Valerie. So anybody else before we wrap up? Okay, I'm seeing no. So I think we have reached the end of our public hearing. If there's no further testimony, we'll conclude the public hearing. Thank you for your participation this evening and the comments provided. A reminder that the comments are due to CZM by 5 p.m. on April 25th, 2025. We appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.